Welcome to the Mental Health Mukbang, where we make mental health easily digestible while eating. So my name is Jeanie Wang, and I'm having grass jelly tea from Meat Fresh.
Hey, I'm Chris. Today I made a mee goreng with a little bit of garlic chili oil.
Okay, that's nice. So I have a ramen kimchi bowl that I grabbed from my pantry. I'm Jeanie Chang. Licensed marriage and family. Do we need to start over? Well, so I just got excited about the food. So let me introduce myself. Jeanie Chang, licensed marriage and family therapist in Raleigh, North Carolina. So unlike you guys in Texas and California, it's harder to get the Asian food, so I got to get it from my pantry.
All right. Okay. My name's Jed. I'm a therapist based out in LA, and I've got popcorn chicken from Tenran. So
Nice.
Yeah.
Don't even know what that place is. Out here.
Do y'all have a tea station out there?
there?
You don't have tea station out in? Well, I don't know. Do you have tea station out in North Carolina? No.
I don't even know what that is.
We don't even have Tenran in Texas, which is shocking to me.
All right. If anybody at Tenran's watching, we should let them know. Y'all need to expand your markets.
Yeah.
So today, what we're talking about is why mukbang, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we should talk about kind of what mukbang is, because some people have never seen it, despite its popularity in some groups. So I nominate Chris to tell us what it is.
Okay. So with mukbang, it's essentially a movement that started in Korea. It's also very popular in Japan, and it's kind of moved to the U.S., but where someone just kind of gorges themselves with food, right? Delicious food. And it was really interesting how it became popular. And one of the leading theories is that because in countries like Korea and Japan, they spend so much time working and don't have time to really get together. When they get home from work, they don't want to eat alone. So they pull up one of these celebrities, gorging themselves on delicious food, and it feels intimate, like they're actually having dinner with someone else. And it just doesn't feel so isolated when you get home. It also makes your food a little bit more enjoyable to actually share it with someone else. And I just thought that was really interesting because I feel like dinner has a very deep and special connection for each of us in the Asian culture. What does that mean for you guys?
Well, I'll admit, okay, so I'm probably the only Asian that didn't hear mukbang. No, I totally think you're right. Our culture is centered on food.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, our parents will ask us, instead of saying things like, how are you doing? They're like, did you eat? Or what are you eating for dinner? And so it's a big part of our culture. And I love the fact you brought up a good point about the isolation. We want to provide mental health and digestible bites, right? And doing it over food, we want to also elaborate on the mukbang concept of that we're all in this together. We want to build this sense of a community sense of belonging, especially as we talk about mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if I was gonna say something a little bit about how, like, at least from my understanding for the mukbang, right? A lot of people, like, or maybe not a lot, but from the ones that I've watched, there is a good amount of like interacting with the audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are for the most part, you watch live streams, and yeah, they take questions, they answer questions, they talk about stuff.
They play games sometimes too.
Yeah. And I mean, there's some on Twitch, which is like the gaming streaming platform, and I think it is kind of like this longing for connection that I think a lot of us are feeling, right? Because at the time of recording, we're at like the tail end of the lockdown, right? And whether or not we feel like the lockdown should be extended or not is a different question. But the reality is, I think a lot of people are kind of craving connection. And that's part of what we want to kind of achieve here, right? For people to kind of be in our conversation. I mean, ours isn't a live stream, at least not yet, right? But at least we are having a conversation with each other. And hopefully people can, I don't know, get a sense of the connection that we have as we're talking about mental health topics, and even as we're kind of just talking about like this whole idea of like, why do we choose a mukbang instead of like any other medium, right? But in a sense, for me, I think it's like sharing, like eating dinner together, right? For my family, eating dinner together was a very important thing, because that's the time that everybody set aside to talk about their day, to talk about what happened. And that was something that, like, I think is one of those generational things that got passed down, because I talked to my parents about it and they're like, yeah, my mom or my grandma, right, would always insist to my dad, like, hey, we need to get together for dinner. Like, everybody needs to be home for dinner. And I think that's a very important part of our culture, just to have that shared time. And yeah, like, food is like the number one, I guess you could call it a love language in, I think, Asian cultures. And I think that's Asian cultures across, like, whether, like, I think I can't think of a single Asian culture where food is not like a primary component in building the relationship between people. And it's like the central thing that brings people together in gatherings. Like, when you think about like a Chinese wedding and you look at the banquet, the idea is everything happens during this banquet. The reason why we're here is for this wedding, but the food is so central, right? We have a giant table and the food is all there. And sometimes, if in like more elaborate banquets, right, the whole like host of like waiters and stuff, they come out and parade the food like in like it's a whole show. And I think part of it is just like the ceremonious part of it, but part of it is just because of how important it is to our culture. And so we're like, you know, yeah, if food is so important to our identities as Asian people, like, think of anything that Asian people get more heated about when it comes. I totally just blanked on the word there, but yeah, like when it comes to food, right? Asians are some of like the most opinionated people when it comes to their own foods. Like, there are, myself included, sometimes there are people who consider themselves like connoisseurs of like tea and like boba, right? Everybody, if you ask somebody what their favorite boba place is, and you ask them why, like, there will be a constant, like, you're gonna get into arguments. It's just gonna happen. And that's why I feel like those boba rating videos are so popular on YouTube. When people are like, yeah, let's rank our boba places. And then in the comment section, everybody's just blowing up about like, I totally disagree with all of your choices. And yeah, it's stuff like that. So if we think that, I guess, collectively, the four of us, right? We thought that food would be an important thing. And why not just why don't we start the conversation there, right? And so...
Well, and obviously when we talk about, Chris said it perfectly, mental health and digestible bites, or being easily digestible. Mm-hmm. Let's admit it. We wanted to do the mukbang concept because we don't talk about mental health in our culture. And so this is our way of also making it more comfortable, digestible, so that we can talk about it more easily. And you brought up food being an important part, but what's the opposite? Like, we don't really talk. We're just eating. Yeah. Well, you know, tradition, right? It's just like wolfing down food. Who watches the K-dramas? And you do know they even purposely, well, no, sorry. This is the way they do in the Korean culture. They slurp their noodles like it's really loud. It's a big thing. But, and I don't know why I'm talking about that, but I'm just saying that's the concept we're doing to really bring mental health to light, really talk about it.
Yeah. We bring what's comfortable with what's uncomfortable, and then we merge the two, and we make it work.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about for you, Jenny?
I think one of the things that I've been really thinking about is just how do we make clinical mental health accessible to people?
Sure.
And so what I love about this idea of mukbang is like, food is messy, y'all. Like, one of these days, one of you is going to spill your ramen all over yourselves on camera. Yeah. And I'm going to have crumbs like all over my.
That's going to be me.
Right? But it creates a casualness and approachability that I think is really important when we talk about mental health. So I do love this idea of it being casual. And if you think of like a Chinese wedding banquet, all the food is out and people are like chopsticks everywhere and people grabbing pieces of food, and it's messy, and it's, you know, and it's this lively experience. And I feel like our group is kind of lively and it has energy, and I hope that we are able to create a space where people feel like it's approachable. And I think with food, that's one of the most easy ways that it can be conveyed.
Absolutely. I think I was doing that with the other series that I was trying to create with having mental health talks over dinner, because I think our end game, our end goal is to normalize conversations about mental health, right? Where for me personally, whenever I want to have a difficult talk with someone, it's like, hey, let's grab a cup of coffee and sit. Let's grab dinner and let's talk about this or whatnot, right? And I want, these difficult talks about our traumas, our fears, to be so commonplace that you can have them at any point in time whenever you're just grabbing a bite with someone, right? To bring it back to the Chinese wedding banquet idea, I think, in our collectivistic cultures, right, regardless of what type of Asian you identify as, food is always the centerpiece, right? It's always shared family style, whereas opposed to in American dining, it's order each of your own separate entrees and keep it to yourself, right? And then I wanted to bring it to another point of what dinner means to us. Jed, you talked about how food is one of the main love languages that we have in our culture, right? That's how our parents showed love to you, and stereotypically because they didn't know how to express it or verbalize, right? I can't think of any time where I've said I love you to my parents outside of after a conflict, right? I definitely, and this is the big one, is I've never heard my parents say I'm sorry, right? And how did stereotypically Asian parents say that they're sorry? Get into this big drag out fight, don't talk to each other, and then it's, hey, I cut some fruit for you, right? Hey, I prepared this meal for you, right? I think a lot of us can really connect with that memory.
I really like that you shared that. So you're saying, I'll admit, as Korean American, as Americanized as I feel like I am, because of the household I grew up in, like I said, just not unloving, but I don't recall my parents really saying, I love you at all. However, I knew I was loved. You know how right? Being well taken care of, food, whatever that they needed to provide me. But just admitting that's a big thing. The fact that even sharing those things, saying those simple words of I love you, I'm sorry, you're right. Can't recall that either, my parents saying that. But I did hear I love you. I do see my parents saying I love you to my kids. So yeah, and I want to say interesting. They say it easily to their grandkids, and I want to say maybe my mom said it to me when I graduated from college. That's what I remember. And I'm sure she said it when I was little. I don't recall though, because it was very, 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 very rare. But again, how as Asian kids, we know we're loved. Yes, through food. My mom made me, she still, let me tell you, still takes over my kitchen. and then freezes this stuff, and I get so mad because it's messy, and then she leaves stuff that we don't end up actually eating, and then we end up wasting it. But that's her way. But guess what? I don't really even have a conversation with her. But she is cooking away, and then and she does play with the grandkids. But I'm sitting there going, yeah, I don't know if I can even have a conversation that's not about, hey, how's the weather? How are you doing? How's the food that you're gonna eat? How are the kids? Not like, just when we're even talking about mental health, gosh, I think it's so far from my parents' minds, right? Yeah. Let's share that.
I also think for us being latchkey kids, I remember just getting home after school, me and my sister doing homework. My sister was tasked with putting the rice in the water in the rice cooker, so it was ready when our parents got home. And I think, if you came from families where your parents worked so much, that dinner was really the only time where they were sitting down with you. And sometimes those conversations weren't really mind-blowing or necessarily, super tender or warm, but it was a time where all four of us were sitting at the same place.
Sure.
So the only time to connect is what you're saying. Otherwise, we're not really
Otherwise, everybody's just doing their own thing again, And I look at how I'm with my kids now, and I have the luxury and the ability to spend so much more time with them, whereas I look at my childhood and they were working their tails off just to keep us, surviving. And so the contrast also is really different, like you were saying, with your mom and with your children, how they can say, hey, I love you. And my parents are super loving to our kids, like hug and, kiss and snuggles. And I'm like, whoa, I never had that.
I know. I was like, what? No. And let's talk about the Asian disciplining just real quick for a second. I don't know about you guys, but like my parents will occasionally say, when they think I'm too strict, they're like, you're too strict. I'd be like, what? Yeah. I mean, I was like, you remember spanking me because I wouldn't practice piano for 2 hours? I mean, I'm just giving an example. They're like, what? We never did that? No. I'd be like, oh my gosh, they really don't remember. So I'm just bringing that up saying very different than the way the kids, our kids are processing things. But the whole point is making mental health digestible. What do you think is the most, I'm going to direct this to Jed. What's the hardest thing to digest about mental health in our culture? What are we, it's a loaded question, but what are we really trying to make more digestible? I can think of some things to say to that, but I want to ask you because you've been quiet.
Well, I've been eating.
Good.
She's like, Jed, answer the question, right? As I'm like putting chicken in my mouth.
Oh, good that you can eat with your mouth open,
I think the biggest thing that I've noticed, just with like my interactions and the people that I've worked with, I think a big problem, I wouldn't say problem. I'm not going to say that it's a problem, but I will say that it is a barrier. And part of that is just the ability to just kind of be vulnerable. And I think it's so hard because in our culture, it's so valued that you need to be, I think, at least as a parent, right? You need to be that stability. You need to be the security, right? And there's like that strong, I guess in a sense you call it, I guess stoicism in a certain aspect of it is just like, I have no weaknesses that you can see, right? And being able to kind of portray that is, I think, part of it. I'm personally not a parent, so I will defer to the parents here, right? But part of it is you want to show your kids that you have things together, and even if you don't completely have things together, you want them to feel safe. And in order to make them feel safe, sometimes you just got to show that you have no weakness, or you feel like you need to show that you have no weakness. And I think sometimes I caught glimpses of that, and through a lot of the counseling that I've done, I see a lot of that in parents, right? When I do therapy with parents, they're like, yeah, like, can't let my kids know, and I think there's a lot that's going on, and I feel that sometimes we don't understand, at least, especially when I was younger, like, there were a lot of things that I did not understand, and my parents would just tell me, and I'm like, why? Because I was that rebellious kid who questioned everything. But I thought about it. I'm like, over time, as I've gotten older and I've started to talk to my parents more about kind of their experiences and stuff like that, and I start to realize that there are a lot of things that they felt too, that they didn't feel like they had the space to express to us, because either one, they didn't think that we would understand, because the reality is that I would not have understood at that time and place. But as I kind of get older, like, why are there these expectations in place? And it's because, like, sometimes in order to do your job, especially with my parents who work in the community, right? They felt that they needed people to see them a certain way in order for them to continue to maintain that respect in the community, so that they would be able to do what they wanted to do. Not that they wanted to, like, put off this, like, fakeness, but just because of the way that the culture is, that if you're not respectable in a certain type of way, like, then it's hard for you to kind of be influential and continue to do your job. So my mom did a lot of, she's kind of like also a counselor, but she did a lot of like parenting workshops, and people really respected her opinions. But we were unruly kids, and that's kind of antithetical, because you look at her kids and you're like, dude, they're kind of like, look at them, right? And she's trying to like tell us about like how to parent our kids. And I think if you look at the long term, I feel that she's pretty proud of the way that we turned out. I think in a in a traditional like Asian sense, neither me nor my siblings, none of us are in, I guess, like Asian respectable fields. And I think a lot of people would look at that and be like, so there's not a single doctor, lawyer, engineer in your family, right? So like, there's usually at least one to kind of like, one sibling can cover that, and then the rest of them is like whatever, right? But like, my brother's a freelance photographer, my sister's a music teacher, I'm a therapist. Like, what happened there?
Yeah, your case is unique. You know?
Yeah, whole nother episode, y'all.
Yeah, that's a whole other episode. No, but the other thing, you brought up something good about, every time you're talking about some of the stigmas in our culture, and or the things that come out of our culture and the stigmas against mental health. I was going to say, I know Jenny's word, perfectionism, right? And we all had those pressures, and our parents, you know, like stoic, didn't show anything. In fact, I have a question that made me think about the parenting thing. Do you have your parents, or have you heard of Asian parents hiding things from their kids, right? The fact that they have cancer. I had a case of a family where, you know, someone had a stage 4 cancer, and they were like, we're not going to tell our kids. And I was thinking, okay, you know, but they're my clients. So I kept that confidential, but it's that Asian, like, no, we don't want to burden them. But meanwhile, you're stage 4 terminal, right?
And you're suffering.
Right. Not only suffering, it's just that I can just imagine that's another part of our mental health where the kids that found out later are extremely hurt or angry, and then they don't have that time with their parent that they could have had, you know, before. Yeah. So I just think of that. And then, perfectionism, that's the word that came up. Saving face. I think you're talking about that, like, having to show that we're perfect, right? Not we, but I meant in general, our culture. I still see it.
Yeah.
I see it everywhere.
And I don't necessarily think that it's like a terrible thing. I think there is value to appearing a certain kind of way, right? And I think that it's important that that people have faith in you, right? And especially as somebody who's like a public leader or somebody who's in like the spotlight, I think that it is really important, and people do care about that. I just finished reading Michelle Obama's book, right? And she wrestles a lot with this idea of having to maintain this persona, and how I think one of the words that her and Obama's like team used was optics, right? How people see you and how people perceive you is very important to whether or not they trust you, whether or not they have faith in what you're doing. And I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing, because it keeps people accountable, right? Mm-hmm. It helps to make sure that you're not doing things that are like out there and disrespecting people, right? And one of the comparisons, let's not get political, but yeah, we'll just like think about it. There are people that are in the spotlight, and there are people that you respect, and there are people that you don't respect. And the reasons why you respect them oftentimes are the way that they're perceived. And I think that there is an importance to that. But also at the same time, like, kind of bringing it back to this whole mukbang idea, right? You still want to have intimacy, and you want to have connection. And I think that, especially in like a smaller family unit kind of setting, I think it's important that we make it easier to talk about. And that's what we're trying to do here, right? We're trying to make this conversation easier by disarming ourselves, essentially, with the food that's on the table, right? And having that, like, if somebody puts your favorite dish in front of you and they want to talk to you, you're gonna be like, okay, all right, I'll give you a little bit of what you want, you know? And that helps to facilitate the conversation.
Good point.
So going back to, we got sidetracked. Let me go back to like my main point earlier about the whole saving face thing, and about how that perception, and the issue is that they're struggling, right? Is that there are, whether it's us or whether it's our parents, whoever, like, there are internal struggles that they're having, and we want to open up that conversation to have those. We want to be able to talk about that, because it might be super westernized, but I think that at the end of regardless of how westernized it is, the reality is that there are support groups that exist, whether or not we recognize them formally or not, you know? One example is those Chinese mom WeChat groups, all right? they are supporting each other, right? And they are venting. I know that for sure because, well, my parents have told me about it. But people express themselves, and I think that is an outlet for a lot of people, and that's the reason why they get together. I used to work in an old people center, and an Asian old people center, and the amount of like smack talk that goes around is like, you know, that they are part of it. Is stress relieving for them as a social worker talking to them about these, and it's like, yeah, that connectedness that they feel is part of just sharing their life with somebody else. And it's so hard. Like, you imagine in a family setting where you're not sharing that life with the people who are supposed to be the closest to you, like, and just not being able to like get the words out or to like let your guard down to be able to get off this, example, cancer diagnosis, right? Mm-hmm. I cannot imagine the struggle of having to keep something that big to myself and just trying to like work through the pain and to like not have that emotional support that you so desperately crave. And I think that like
I don't know, you know what, you were saying something about emotionally, the emotional support that they desperately crave. Sometimes I actually don't know if they crave that because it's just so engraved to not have that. Yeah. What was Chris gonna say? Right? I mean, I saw that in this client. She was more like protecting her kids so much. That's what she was focusing on. I had to just go with it. Right. But I was like, yeah, she was in extreme pain and it was terminal. So I was thinking, I didn't see that. I actually saw, I mean, so I'm not disagreeing with you, Jed, but I just saw her as just that Asian, the resilience, I guess, of like protecting my kids. We're not supposed to show that I'm in pain, so I will not let them know. Clearly she was, and there are times I didn't see her because she was going through all this chemo. Mm-hmm. But anyways, Jenny's been silent. Perfectionism is a whole topic for you, which I guess we could talk again, but
I'm gonna start talking and just like
I know. Jenny's like, no, but I was gonna say, I mean, before we wrap up, we started our conversation on the mukbang. Let's hear some thoughts.
Well, I did want to lead into some questions for the two of you, Jenny and Jeanie, in a bit, right? I did want to first go into like that concept of honor and saving face, because I actually go the opposite direction, and the concept of honor and saving face kind of drives me insane, right? Because of that constant need to be perfect to the outside world, because I grew up in seeing a lot of that competitiveness of using your children as like trophies. Right? My child's better than yours because of these different reasons, and then chastising their kids behind the scenes, right? And that, just builds up so much confusion, right? When they're saying like, oh, my kid's so much better than yours, and then saying like, your grades are crap behind the scenes, right? Or watching elders kind of interact with each other with that concept of face and honor, and then like despising each other or gossiping about each other behind each other's backs. I can't stand it. That's why I am the way that I am, and I speak my mind, for better or for worse, right? Sometimes, a lot of times for worse, but at least you know what I'm thinking.
Why do you think for worse? That's interesting.
Yeah.
Why?
But I did want to ask you guys, because for me growing up, I both dreaded and looked forward to dinners, right? Especially big family dinners, because for me, it was the only time I really got to connect and sit and interact with a lot of my extended family, right? And because we didn't know how to communicate, like we were talking about food being this love language, that's how we connected. But at the same time, that was also a difficult time, because that became, don't tell them this, don't tell them that, or they come down and they criticize you or ask you, why aren't you a doctor yet? Where's your wife, et cetera, et cetera. But I wanted to ask the two of y'all, because Jed and I don't have kids. Hearing that division between the generations, what do you envision dinner looking like for your kids when you grow older? Like what about our rituals are you going to pass down?
Well, Jenny, answer first.
That's a great question.
And her kids are younger, so she'll have a different perspective,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think growing up for me, dinner was I mean, sometimes when I was older, but it wasn't always like, it didn't always feel super connected. I don't think my parents had the language to even ask.
Sure.
Right. And so it was more maybe like functionally, practically, like, what'd you do today? Did you pass that test? Da, 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 da.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about what I hope for my kids, because they're 7 and 4, I think my goal for dinners would be much more about, what made you happy today? What did you do with your friends? Much more relationally based.
Sure.
And so I see that as a difference. But then I also see that how my kids are trying to barge in right now. I also see that piece of how I use food as a love language with them, even though it's not even conscious, And so I very much hope to bring dinners to that place where they can feel safe, and that they feel loved, and I do feel like I hope to bring that down, and even just like sharing with them like the cultural foods. That's really important to me. Like our kids love grass jelly and popcorn chicken and all the Taiwanese snacks, because that is really important.
It's probably too spicy. No, I love that. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. No,
no, yeah.
7 and 4. So Chris, loaded question too. I love the question. Mm-hmm. So my kids are 13, 16, 18, and 19, almost 20. I want to say, growing up, I will admit, like I said, it's a loving home, but it was very stressful. I did grow up in a very stressful, like, we got to get the A's, and what Ivy League are you going to? And when I got to dinner and knew when my dad came home, like I said, it wasn't like terrifying, but I'd be like, oh, is he going to ask about my latest test? That's what I remember. I do remember having good food and liking eating it, but not really enjoying dinner. If I really have to delve deep and think about that. So the dinner table today at my house, as Jenny was talking, I was trying to really think, okay, let me really be honest about what our dinner tables look like. Well, I think, to be honest, they're kind of funny. I mean, I think I'm a working mom too. And so I have my own, like, I'm tired, right? And so sometimes I don't want to bring up the things that I could discuss, which I'm not even I could discuss grades at school. You know what we actually do? No, I think we actually talk about funny stuff, and I think the kids make fun of each other, and I'm just watching. I think one of the most productive things that my husband actually started was sharing a high and low. Mm-hmm. So we would eat, and we'd go around the table saying, what's your high, what's your low? And mm-hmm. some of the lows were hilarious. Most of the time it was like, because she was mean to me or whatever, or like mommy yelled at me about not doing laundry, stuff like that. But a high was always good to hear, like, it was always related to like friends or something, or family outings. And the reason why I bring this up is because our dinners, I don't believe, and I think you can ask my kids someday, interview my kids, I don't think they're stressful. Like, that's what I was trying to say. Dinner, first of all, when you're eating food, I mean, mukbangs, right? They shouldn't be stressful. Yeah. And I studied a little bit about mindful eating because I was really concerned about the holistic health. And you're supposed to mindfully and slowly digest, right? Because it's good for your digestive system instead of whooping down the food. And I think we take our time with dinner, and sometimes they just sit there afterwards. And I just thought about that, and no one's ever asked me that, Chris. Like, I don't think about it, but I'm observing even last night that they sat there. I ended up cleaning up, and I was thinking, oh, seriously, they're just still sitting there. But isn't that a sign that they like sitting there to talk?
Yeah,
getting up to leave and going upstairs and not wanting to be around mom and dad.
Yeah, absolutely.
So very different. But I agree with you about the saving face. That's why I brought it up. I see it all the time, not just among Asian American families, but among Asian American professionals. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know we might have to wrap up, but how many of you guys, we're all therapists, when you share what you do you see a little bit of a look from fellow Asian Americans? I do.
Yeah.
I mean, the corporate people are like, oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm in mental health. Okay. And I'd be like, I'm a licensed mental health clinician. Oh, I mean, I don't know. I get a little look like, oh, okay.
I don't ask you if your parents like ever just say like, oh, they're doctors. You're like, not like that.
But calling us a doctor?
Yeah. With your doctorate, they never try to pull that.
No. You know why? Because my dad is a doctor, so I think
That makes sense.
he might be like, she ain't no doctor. What he does do is like, I told you guys this, please tell me you're not doing that like yoga mindfulness with your clients. Like, so what do you, I go, Dad, what do you mean? That's just it's meditation practice. That's fine. That's good for, he's like, I think that's strange. I mean, you know what I mean? He does, and I'm like, no, I do a lot more than that. But even him still has a far off concept of like, I don't know, you know? So I have to educate my parents too. But we might have to wrap up, huh? Talking about the mukbang and on to our next episode.
Sure.
Well,
right?
I do. Well, as I guess for one thing, if we're gonna wrap up, right? I had a question kind of just brewing in my mind, because since we're on the topic of like food, right? And since we're talking about kind of mental health and kind of opening up, right? I want to pose this question to you. Is there a food that you have that you associate with an emotion? Because there are certain foods that we like, comfort foods. That's a thing. No matter what culture you're in, you have like a food that you go to because you're feeling a certain kind of way. And I mean, I feel like we could have another episode just on like which foods make you feel whatever way, you know, what food you go to for certain things. But yeah, so if you could like just pick one strong emotion that you have attached to a food, like what would it be, and what is the emotion, and what is that connection? Let's wrap up with that question. How about that?
That's a great question. Someone start.
I'll start. So I know immediately that question. I mean, for me, it's sweet and sour ribs, pork ribs. It's tang cu pai gu in Chinese. And this recipe was passed down from my grandmother to my mom. I now make it for my kids. I plan to teach my kids how to make this. And it was always a comfort food because it's salty, sweet, sticky, sour. I mean, it's just everything. And it brings to me feelings of warmth and love, because every time I came home from college, my mom knew I loved this dish and she would make it for me. And it was that intentionality and forethought that I just knew, like when I came home, that'd be waiting for me. And so for me, that's sweet and sour ribs.
That sounds yummy. How about Crisco?
I have a complicated history with food just because of my immune disorder. So there were a lot of times where I couldn't eat for like weeks on end. So I would probably have to say like soups in general, because that was always when my mom knew that he's in so much pain, he can't eat these solid foods, right? Then just make him some soup broth, whether it was like gan or pho or whatever it was.
Sharing that, yeah, soups are big in our culture, right? Soups and
definitely.
stews. I'll share. I was trying to decide which one. I'll share my love-hate relationship. It's called, in Korean, it's called kimbap. So it's like rolled up cooked sushi, right? Yeah. With like radish and Korean bulgogi beef. The love-hate is, hate-love. I used to hate it.
Yeah.
Because what I recall was being force-fed the kimbap because it's easy to eat and you have all your vegetables. When I was little and my sister was born, I think, and my mom was busy and my grandmother would just force feed me this. And of course, if you're force fed, and I would remember even spitting it out, and I couldn't eat it for years. Now, the love part is, it's one of my favorite dishes and my go-to at the Korean market just to grab and eat. And when my mom comes to visit, I'll specifically ask her to make it because I'm lazy, because you got to roll up, you know. And I don't know how it changed, but I want to say probably because over time it's important for my own mental health. I started appreciating a lot of things about my culture, and kimbap was one of them. Going, this is good, man. This is a cool concept. It's like all the vegetables and meat and rice in one bite-sized sushi bite, right? So yeah, now I actually love it, but hated it for years. In fact, I would get nauseated thinking about it.
Yeah.
But all right, Chris, it's on you.
Or Jed.
Sorry, Jed. My bad. I was looking at Chris.
So for me, one of those foods is I actually posted this to my own social media like earlier this week. One of them for me is almond tofu. So in Canto, it's like hangyan tofu. And
Yum.
so it's almond tofu, and it's fruit cocktail, literally just straight from a can. The almond tofu is like, it's for the most part, people just make it out the box. Like, it's a box, there's powder, it's like gelatin.
I want it so badly. Gosh, all this stuff sounds so good.
You've never had it? Oh my gosh.
No. Yeah, so
I've never had it.
It's literally like the most, like the easiest dessert to ever make. You just like, it's like Jell-O, and then after it's set, you just cut it up and then you throw like a can of fruit cocktail in it.
Sounds familiar.
And the reason why I have such a strong attachment to it is just because growing up, I went to a lot of church potlucks, and church potlucks for me were a great time to like get together with people, and I really felt community. I felt like connected. It's when all the church aunties would feed me lots of food. Like, my association with this dish is just, if we were having a reason to get together, that means I got to play with my friends. I got to help make dumplings. I got to eat tons of food, and at the end of it, it's like this is just one of those things that I really enjoyed. And so that dish brings back the connection, the humanity that I felt, and the whole just like being a part of a group of people who like cared about you. And so for me, that's the almond tofu. It's like it's like a warm hug, except it's a cold dish. But yeah, it's like, it's the capstone to every church potluck that I ever went to, and somebody always brought it. And I was always happy when two people brought it, because that means it was just extra for everybody. And if I could have, when I was younger, I would have just
stolen it. Okay.
I probably, like, I would have just sat there and just ate the entire thing by myself. But yeah, so like sometimes when I just feel disconnected, I just go, I'll just go to the store, I'll buy it, and I'll make it myself. It takes like the longest part is just waiting for it. But yeah, it always evokes this feeling of nostalgia and connection for me. And yeah, so that's mine.
That's awesome. Well, that's a great way to end and ask questions about that. So there we have it, our mental health mukbang, or the mental health mukbang. Until next time.